Mike, give me another sound check real quick.
Testing.
Hey, there you are. Now I think we got you. Anybody in the audio out there or in the world of YouTube, go ahead and just give me a thumbs up or shoot me a text or chat message saying that you can hear Mike. Make sure that we're good to go. You should be good right
got
now.
It? All right.
I think we're good. All right, let's continue on. I'm going to back up one step here, Mike, since I missed some of the first audio of the show, and we're going to kind of review just a couple of things here. So you're Mike Engel. You're from ESG. Real quick, just tell me one more time again, how did you kind of get your start in the world of architecture, design, and iterative design?
Yeah, so very much started from a young age, always in architecture. And got into kind of iterative design just by necessity, always working between Sketches and Revit and various things, and really having a dislike for repetitive workflows that weren't adding to my projects.
Right.
So then digging that in and jumping on to learn things like Dynamo to connect workflows and automate workflows and all sorts of different things and just test different things as quick as possible.
Yeah.
So it's kind of been a process of necessity.
Exactly. And when you first started this, you were saying that when you started at your current company, they were kind of already into Revit, and other companies that you'd work with, they were in some cases using AutoCAD or Revit, but you know, you kind of self-taught yourself this world of iterative design and Dynamo and Formit and the other tools that you've been playing with, because there wasn't a lot of resources out there at the time, so you kind of picked it up on your own, trial and error.
Yeah, it's been very much a trial and error. An attitude of, gee, this isn't working quite well enough for me, or it can't quite do something I need to do for a design process, and just freewheeling it a little bit to go to a different design tool, make that work, and then create those connections to come back.
Yep. So let's kind of talk a little bit about what exactly is iterative design. And then we're also going to talk about what is generative design, because I think some people use the terms interchangeably. And I kind of want to make sure we're being clear as to what it is we're actually doing here. So what is iterative design to you, Mike?
Yeah, so there's definitely a distinction that, as you said, gets muddied and ignored maybe in a lot of conversations between iterative design and generative design. Iterative design is just working through design. We all kind of do it in stages and iterating
manually
to make it better
in a lot
each
of
time.
cases.
I mean, even working through trace paper in a traditional method of layers is iterative.
Absolutely.
Our new tools just allow us to do that even more. Versus generative design is really more kind of on the definition of, I'm going to put in the parameters and let processes and computer calculations generate it.
Right.
The two aren't necessarily distinct and separate things. They're very much related, but they're also different methods and things. You can use them both, or you can just use one.
Right.
You can do generative design and get only one iteration. It wouldn't be iterative.
True.
And you do iterative design that took no method of generation through tools, and you just did it a lot.
Right. So in the case of like iterative design, it would be you creating. And let's just use Dynamo as an example, because iterative design, like you said, trace paper wise, multiple sketches is different iterations of your design. But in the case of like a Dynamo process where you've got different parameters that you have programmed that have different ranges of abilities, you cycle those, and that can create different iterations. You can do that either manually as well, where you go, hey, 3 floors or 4 or 5 floors, and then the design updates according to what Dynamo puts out. But there's ways of automating that process as well.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing about a Dynamo that's so wonderful is you can start to give it multiple inputs. So if you think about a building and you want to understand what the implications are for different stories of a building, the old method would be put one in, get your output,
right,
and look at that. Versus now these tools, we can say, well, these are all my options. I want you to look at all the possibilities of these 10 different building heights and what are the outputs, and do those all essentially simultaneously.
Yep.
Which really brings the iterative design kind of to another level. Versus generating, you may say, well, the criteria are it has to sit within a zoning envelope. So
right,
computationally, tell me what fits.
Right.
Tell me what those outputs are going to be.
Yeah, I have a max square footage of X. You know, I want to have a minimum square footage per floor usable of X. I want to have that zoning criteria as well. You know, what all these different the values that we think about in our own heads right now when we're designing, we can tell a computer, and then it can basically spit out hundreds or thousands of variations of the design, and then we can pick from that. That's generative design, where it generates the sort of envelope or the starting point for us, and then we can further refine that, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, cool. And have you done anything with that yet? Have you worked with any of those tools that do some generative design at this point?
On a very basic level,
Sure.
I mean, it depends on how far you want to take the definition. But there's definitely both on the local side of using Dynamo to input a lot of variations and understanding multiple possibilities on the outcome. And then also getting into some of the fractal with Dynamo, pushing
Right.
that to the web and letting a server in the cloud generate, you know, hundreds of options, and then really whittling that down based on criteria.
Yeah, so if you guys want to know more about fractals specifically, if you want to dig into it yourselves, Autodesk here has on their site, it's home.fractal.live. You can dig into and see some of what Fractal can do. I believe you can even get a part of the program right now. You can get some access to Fractal once you have Dynamo Studio available to you. And of course, if you're not working in Dynamo yet and you want to dig into Dynamo, you can go dynamobim.org and get a bunch of information on Dynamo itself and get access to the essential Dynamo tools that you need. So great way to kind of get your foot in the door there. Mike, have you looked at all at Autodesk's tool called Dreamcatcher? I'm not sure if you've had a chance to look at that or if you've heard much about it.
Not recently. I looked at it, I think, when it initially was announced, and that was just real briefly.
Yeah, and it was actually announced officially on main stage of Autodesk University 2016, I believe.
Sounds about right.
I think that's about right. And then it was supposed to have gone live already and be available for the public. Unfortunately, just due to development efforts, it hasn't gone live. It's still a really exciting program in my opinion, but this is the one where you can actually do more generative style design, where you give it the parameters. And they've got some really interesting stories over here as well, and some sort of videos about what they, you know, what the criteria was and how it was used to generate things. In a lot of cases, you see this used mechanically, but in parts manufacturing. But I think you can also find some really interesting ways of leveraging this architecturally once it's available. But I don't think any of us actually have live access to this other than a core beta team right now. So
that's my understanding. Yeah, I mean, I think there's also, is it Within from Autodesk that runs with Inventor?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yep. All right, so Mike, I know you prepared a little bit of a PowerPoint here that we were going to kind of talk through on some of the other topics of iterative design and kind of how it's a big benefit. I'm going to jump into that video that we talked about earlier just directly. This is one that we were talking about Formit, I believe, to a tower. So Formit is another design tool. It's kind of like a conceptual modeling or like a SketchUp for Autodesk of sorts, right?
Yeah, that's kind of the nutshell.
Kind of the nutshell, right? So it allows you to do some preliminary design. It allows you to drive some of that design using Dynamo, but then it also allows, obviously, output into Revit directly, so you're not throwing away work. One of the things Mike mentioned earlier was that this whole frustration of doing a bunch of design and then having to throw it away and redo a lot of that work, that's inefficient. And so finding ways of making less discarded effort in the architectural process here. So this is the video that I believe you just sent me. Let's see if we can get this thing to play here. It was working moments ago. Try again. Oh, now it decides it doesn't want to work. Oh, isn't that lovely? Oh, hey, look, there it goes.
There you go. That's it.
All right. So why don't you talk through what's going on here? You want me to start this over?
This is just a really kind of a quick study of a bigger process of working interoperability. But what you have is Dynamo Studio running, and it's reading some basic footprint sketches. In this case, generating those on a format as closed surfaces that are footprints. And then just doing, some basic variables on top of that, such as how high and what level spacings do I want out of that. So it's just this idea that you can take what's a very traditional method of sketching a footprint of a building and immediately getting some feedback of, well, what does that mean when I extrude this, and even extrude this at different levels with podiums and depths, and rather than kind of the more traditional direct model approach that might be done in Format or various softwares of extruding it once, going through generating all the levels and information. This kind of automates a lot of that for you.
Yeah. And have you done much running of that inside of Fractal itself with that particular model that you were kind of playing with?
Not that particular one, I have not. I've done some other smaller built ones.
Yeah. So in that case, what you were doing is you were doing sort of a manual iteration. It's still iterative design, but you're manually setting the sliders inside a Dynamo, and then in Dynamo, and then it updates whatever's going on inside the Format environment.
Yep.
Awesome. So you had another example of how you were leveraging this. This, I believe, was the panel layout. Let's go ahead and pop this guy open as well. This one's a little bit longer in its time frame, and I think it's playing right now.
And this one, it's the same idea of how do we iterate through multiple design options, and it's also starting to look at, well, how do you start to manipulate information in an interface other than Revit for either ease of use or also for working with team members that won't or can't work in Revit. So essentially what's happening here is we're extracting a whole bunch of information for reference planes and grids and kind of what the criteria is as the structure out of the Revit model. And in the back end, Dynamo is running and pulling all that out and generating some structured points and geometry. And then simultaneously, we've got this Excel file that's the same grid as our elevation. And we're just telling it based on a number value what type of panel to put into it, whether it's a 1 or a 2 or a 0. And then that's looping back around and actually generating the panel layouts back inside of Revit. So if anybody's ever kind of tried to do something like this, it can be done manually, and I can take panels and create them once and copy them off a building, and that works great once. But you can kind of start to see here that just by clicking a few values in Excel, in real time, I can get both a visual feedback and an understanding of what that means inside of the context of the model. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's significantly faster than sort of a manual array or manually selecting a bunch of panels in the Revit environment. When you can do it from a data aspect, I mean, this is so much faster. So much more efficient.
Well, then it opens up a whole bunch of windows of, when you do it in an array, you've kind of set that it has to be a certain pattern.
Right.
This starts to open it up. I could just make those all different and really play with the patterning.
Heck, you could even use some of Excel's internal sort of iteration of sorts to kind of randomize some of the numbers if you wanted to see what it would spit out, and just F9 your way through it and let Revit update based on that as well. That would be interesting in some cases. Not in this case, but in some cases.
Yep. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of opportunity for those things. I mean, you could do this with window layouts. You could do this with a lot of different things.
Yep, surface finishes. In this case, panels, which is a lot like surface finishes. That's pretty sweet. All right, I'm going to close this out. Now, you had a PowerPoint that you sent me. I'm going to pull this up real quick as well, and we can kind of talk through a little bit of what you've got here. I have the slide right after that video pulled up. With a floor plan and some data here in Excel and a Dynamo table down below.
Yeah, so this is kind of I think a lot of the times when we talk about iterative and generative design, the conversation immediately goes to the complex and eye-catching forms.
Right.
That we all love to see pictures of, and it's really informative. But in truth, it's not the majority of what we as a profession actually create. And so this is actually a tool that's probably gets used at least once a month on a project I'm working on. But pretty much every project that I work on, this thing touches in some form. And it's just this, you put your program in of what the design program needs to be into a spreadsheet, and then using Dynamo and computation in the back end, you have this ability in Revit now to place rooms and kind of that free sketching form of moving shapes around.
Right.
And what's happening essentially is I'm just cross-referencing what I'm modeling to what I'm programming and letting all of that happen in the background. So I, as a designer, can push and pull in a very free format but still get that feedback of understanding what is my design decision and how does that relate to the requirements kind of on a very immediate process. Because, I mean, the old method is draw a whole building, pull all the data out, and then go, oops, it doesn't meet the program.
Right.
Kind of got to start over. And, that doesn't make any sense in my mind why that would happen today. So this is it's a really relatively basic tool of just cross-referencing these two data sets.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you can actually have this information being pulled live with Dynamo. You can have it on automatic run. You make a change in Revit, and immediately you're getting this feedback in your Excel spreadsheet that's either on a different monitor or right next to your design environment. So that makes that process nice and smooth and streamlined.
Yeah, and again, you can start to engage people that aren't in the model, but are on the project and related to the program.
Right.
They could be in their own Excel document reading the same file and understand what you're doing and what it means to the program
right.
on a Revit user.
I've also seen a lot of situations where you may have like a senior designer almost designing over your shoulder, and they ask you to do some things, and again, you're driving, but they're getting that instant feedback beyond just a graphic and a floor plan. It's getting the data as well. They can see ramifications. You can see ramifications. So whichever role you're playing, you can still get that information live out of the model, or pushing data into the model. You can even get some of this live feedback pushed into Revit if you really wanted to, with some of the color fills and stuff.
Yeah.
So a lot that could be done there. I think this next slide was kind of another example of sort of the same thing we just saw in the video format, was it not? Or did you have something else?
Yeah, so this is kind of the only thing here. So what you can see is this is the same project, but you can see, it still starts with a very basic sketch on yellow trace paper.
Right.
And then you can see in the back end what was actually happening in Dynamo is these color-coded panels, not so much about, what the finishes actually were, but just color-coding what the types of the panels were and what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can kind of see the layout as an overall on the building facade, and then again, you're not talking materialization at this level because we're not really to that level of the discussion, but you can at least see visually, very obviously, what that layout is supposed to look like.
Yep.
How the materials will be dispersed in the future. So another example, what is it? Similar project, or is it?
Well, that's just the video.
No, that's the video. That's right. We already did that one. All right.
I got that one.
Excellent.
Yeah, and this is just kind of bringing that whole process, what you saw in those last ones, kind of all on one project, what happens, but it's just this, quickly working, in this case, in Format to make some massing and really setting up these criteria through Dynamo to generate this Revit model, and then in the end, the finished rendering on the side of that, what that whole process ends up with.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really a holistic view. You're as end users, it's not just hey, all of a sudden I have a need, bring Dynamo, and it could be something that you're doing the entire life cycle of the project to really get you to that final design, and using it throughout, so it's not just a disruption. It's actually a big benefit to your workflows.
Yeah, and it also helps. I see filtering out what do I want to focus on. If I'm just focusing on the massing, I can set up that criteria. Yep. And then as a designer, I can just play with that massing and let based on criteria the rest of the project develop.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to shut that down real quick here. Again, if you guys want any more information on this this kind of tool set here, again, it's dynamobim.org, or sorry, dynamobim.org. You've got the Fractal tool set here, which allows you to kind of iterate through. We didn't show a lot about the Fractal today, but this is a great way of kind of, if you're doing sort of that massing iteration, the ability to go through and have a lot of your Dynamo settings just automated throughout, and have it auto-generate some of the options for you and give you some of that data back. That's pretty cool. If you do want to know more about the generative design side, especially that which Autodesk is focusing on, you can kind of do a quick search on Autodesk and generative design, and you'll find a lot of what they're working on, and specifically how they're kind of leveraging this in some of their internal projects, some of their internal sort of labs projects. So you guys can kind of dig into and see more about this in your own firms, and it's really accessible. I mean, like we talked about earlier with Mike, it's not something that you have to go to a formalized training on. In a lot of cases, most of the individuals that are leveraging this, they're doing a lot of teaching. Now you can get training on this. You can get more advanced, and there's a lot of us out there that are doing training on these tool sets. But if you wanted to, get your foot in the door, start downloading the tools, start playing with them right now.
Yeah, and I would just add, if you got Revit, it's probably already installed, so you're probably good to go. Just look up at the Manage tab, and it's there.
Exactly.
Unless you're IT.
Exactly. Unless they're hiding it on you.
It could be.
So, Mike, let's talk about something a little bit, maybe the same, maybe different. What in the world of BIM, in the world of technology right now, is getting you super excited?
The biggest thing is just the interoperability that, it's no longer. There was a long time, I think, in the history, particularly of Revit and when BIM started, that the focus was get everything in one model.
Right.
And I think that's been a struggle for a few years of everybody trying to figure out what that golden ticket was.
Right.
How do you make that perfect tool that's going to allow the whole process to happen? And I think for good, what we're starting to see is an acknowledgement that probably won't ever happen. At least not on a holistic scale.
Right.
And so how do you start to then create these connections? And that's a lot what I've started to look at is, there's going to come a time when whatever tool you're using is not going to achieve what you need to achieve. And having the ability as both a user and a firm and through the process to be able to say that, admit that, and then gather that tool, whether it's another team player or another just tool, and create those connections, again, so you're not repeating stuff. But there's definitely times when I could do a lot of things in Revit, but it might take me a day versus just jumping out to Excel or a different tool, and it might only take me 30 minutes to do the same thing and then and generating it back. So that's the biggest thing that has me excited, is just this whole interoperability between various platforms and really opening that up to all users.
Yep, exactly. I mean, again, to kind of expand upon that, when you're building a building, when you're actually constructing a building, there's many tools involved. There's cranes, there's hammers, there's, drills, there's everything that you could think of to construct a building. When you're working on your vehicle, if you happen to be a gearhead, you don't use just one tool. It's not just a simple, combination wrench, right? You're using all kinds of things. So the same thing is true in design of architecture. You're going to use many tools. Revit's one, and it's a great tool and it can handle a lot of stuff, but it's not the only one out there, and it's not always the most efficient. Can I, when I'm building a building, can I drive a screw with a hammer? Sure. Not the right tool for the job, though. Probably a better one out there. So, yeah, Dynamo is a great addition to your design environment, and Excel is a great addition. And there's other tools that can help automate some of the simple tasks as well. You don't necessarily have to be a Dynamo expert. I know CAD Technology Center makes a tool set that lets you kind of push and pull data with Excel, not as live as Dynamo, but you can push and pull data. So you can still get your foot in the door without having to be a programmer. But visual programming really is not that big of a hurdle. Mike, when you were learning it, what did your learning process of Dynamo specifically look like?
Well, initially when I learned about kind of programming and architecture, I was totally against it. And it's kind of interesting to have come around the other side. I mean, when I was in school, Grasshopper was just starting out, and there was this conversation of generative at that point and just computational and architecture. And I'll fully admit I was on the side of, no, you got to sketch, you got to use the pencil. You can never use the computer to create the design. Great, use it for documentation and the construction coordination, but absolutely not for design.
Right.
And I've kind of just not necessarily come around to the other side, but kind of grasp both. And so I'm just going to do both. And now, Dynamo has really opened up that ability that, I can start to leverage all of these different interoperabilities simultaneously. And that's really been a big change, both. I think culturally, you see a lot across firms of admitting that we can use both. And also just in my work daily is working back and forth, whether it's the pen or the Dynamo or whatever. So
right. Again, using the right tool for the job at the right time. So. Yep. All right, Mike, when we talked earlier this week, I told you I was going to ask you this question, and I didn't want to know what you were going to say at the time. So right now we're going to kind of jump into this. All the guests that I bring on the full BIM broadcast segments, I like to ask this. If you had a 2-minute soapbox, and this is yours right now, to talk to the world about any topic, what would that be? And so, Mike, 2 minutes on the clock.
2 minutes, you got a timer? I'll just put this I have two little girls, and they are wonderful, and they love the outdoors and the wilderness. And I see so much in our kids today that they are not given those opportunities. I grew up in scouts, camping, backpacking, hiking, canoeing, you name it. Um, and so, any organization that I can find that promotes that, whether it's Outward Bound or Widgie, that really starts to talk about our youth and get them out. And I'll even say, I don't usually plug a specific group, and I'm absolutely not the person that goes out and buys any trinkets and things. But just recently, I learned about an organization called She Jumps, and they promote girls in the outdoors, both older girls and professionals. And having two little girls, it really struck with me that they're focusing on this and promoting skiing and outdoors and fishing with girls. And so that was really amazing. It was to the amazing point that I immediately went online and bought 3 baseball caps and a box of stickers of their logo as a giraffe horn. So that's just been something that I'll continue to support. And if you ask my girls, they know that's what we do. We go camping, and I just really want to see more of that across both youth, boys and girls, but
absolutely,
particularly promoting it with girls. So
we get so many people just buried behind computer screens. I'm guilty of that myself sometimes, buried in my own phone. And there's this whole world of the outdoors. It's great. From a design side, you can get just such inspiration out there, but just the fresh air for health wise. I mean, get out there, go play, go fish, go, camp, go whatever, go outside.
I would add that to all the professionals listening. The best thing I did last year was I took 2 weeks in the car with my kids, driving across Montana, Wyoming, seeing the parks, and we took our phones and iPads and turned everything off but the camera. It was the only thing we used them for, is because that's what we use for cameras, but we basically were 100% disconnected from anything but cameras for 2 weeks, just the 4 of us traveling. And, wherever you want to do that, I would promote that to everybody to take that time and experience it and get out of the office.
Excellent. Well, Mike, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate that. Just a quick shout out for another event that's coming up that keeps you indoors, but is still a good event to go to. RTC Events is out right now, and I believe I know registration's open. I don't believe it's closed yet. So if you are thinking about going to RTC, the BILT conference specifically, RTC Events is the organization, BILT is the conference now. If you're thinking about going to the BILT conference here in North America in Missouri this year, St. Louis, Missouri, get in there, get signed up, because the registration usually closes pretty quickly. So your deadlines are coming up now. Great event, fantastic event. Now that Midwest University is over for me on our side, it's all about BILT and getting ready for that. So hope to see you guys there. Mike, thank you again. We look forward to talking with you more in the future on other interesting topics and designs and theories that you come up with. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Shawn.
Have a great day.
All right.